20th of June 2024. This video is one of those staring into the fire videos of mine. I want to talk about Putin's visit to North Korea and to Vietnam. Now, I have said it previously in some of my discussions on the channel and videos. So I've mentioned that Putin and Xi Jinping is doing this BRICS thing with a plan. They've got a plan, and I think the main aim is to break the stranglehold that the collective West has on the rest of the world. And all the sanctions against Russia since the Ukraine special military operation started was sort of a booster for the plan with BRICS. Now, I have a suspicion, and please, you must understand, I am speculating on many things, but I base my speculations on things that I see and that I notice. And I have a suspicion that this initial, let's call it a drive of BRICS to promote trade between the non-West countries. Let's call it, I'm going to call it the Global South so that you know what I'm talking about. It is the opposite of the West. Now, if you look at the Global South, you will, and you look critically at the countries in the Global South, you will find that there's almost not a single country that is not subjected to one or other form of sanctions by the West, and specifically, primarily by America. But that useless Europeans, they just do whatever the guys in the shithouse in Washington tell them to do. Because Europe is not independent. They are American vassals. That's what they are. There's a few countries that are beginning to kick against that now, but I have a suspicion that some of them has left it too long. For them it's too late. Now, let's get back to Xi Jinping and Putin. So, with China being the massive commercial and industrial force that it is, it gives momentum to BRICS. And then with Russia, that has been subjected to all the sanctions by the West, but Russia has a hell of a lot of natural resources that the rest of the world just cannot operate without. Those two things, those factors, plus you've got two extremely capable, strong leaders in those two countries, has given BRICS the traction that it wouldn't have gotten under normal circumstances. And then the Europeans and the Americans lost their bloody minds and they stole the Russian foreign reserves. Now that made the Global South extremely nervous because they see it and they think to themselves, if they are willing to steal Russia's foreign assets, what will they do to us? They're going to do the same thing to us. Russia can at least fight back, but we can't. So countries are busy pulling their reserves out of America, out of Britain, out of Europe. And there is this drive in the BRICS bloc to trade in local currencies and bypass the dollar. Sideline the dollar, basically, not bypass it, sideline it. And that, all of those things are weakening the American financial base. But I can't understand that the people in Washington don't realize this. I remember when the SMO started, I read an article in which there was people, economists, that went to Yellen at the Treasury in the States and told her directly, you must not fuck around with the Russian foreign assets. It will hurt us. But they just carried on and did what they like. And that stupid, senile Biden, I don't know who the hell he is actually and what he is. And I don't know what drugs they pump into him to keep him going, because that guy is a walking corpse as far as I'm concerned. So all of these things gave credibility to the leadership that Putin and Xi were displaying in BRICS. And today we're sitting in a situation that dollar trade in the BRICS bloc has dropped dramatically. Now you must understand one thing about the dollar being a global reserve. That allowed the Americans to print as much money as they want, and they could export. They've been exporting their inflation to all the other countries. Now you can see the signs beginning to show in the States. Their inflation is rising, and it's just going to get worse. But back to Xi and Putin. So they used the trade thing, and then they made it very clear that there's no interference in domestic affairs of member countries. They don't interfere in that. Now there are some stupid people here in South Africa that are interpreting that non-interference thing that those two leaders are promoting as if they condoning what the stupid fucking ANC is doing here in South Africa and has been doing in South Africa. Now that is going to be a major problem, because the rest of the BRICS countries, they know exactly what the hell this ANC government has done to South Africa. And South Africa, the government in South Africa, is totally in control of XXX, because they owe the West so much money that they can't really make a move. Okay. Now we see what happens in North Africa. And I have said, I have a suspicion that Xi Jinping and Putin is planning to build BRICS into a replacement for the UN. Let that sink in. Why do I say that? First of all, the UN is totally captured by America. Totally. And the American vassals in Europe, they do what the Americans tell them to do. So the UN is captured by the West, and the UN does not represent the global South fairly. So Putin and Xi is positioning BRICS to become an alternative for the UN. I am convinced about that. Then you look at the BRICS Bank. It is quite clear that the BRICS Bank is busy positioning itself to become an alternative for the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And that bulletin that the BRICS Bank published last year, around about July, in which it said, if a country has defaulted on payments to the IMF or the World Bank, it will not count against them if they apply for a loan at the BRICS Bank. It is my opinion that what they actually said to the countries is don't pay the World Bank and the IMF. But I have told the story about what I think what happened with Wagner and the so-called coup that Prigozhin tried. Now I see Wagner is operating as the Africa Corps, and they are active in Northern Africa. When Niger told the French and the Americans to move their soldiers out of their country, initially the French resisted like hell, and there were stories of ECOWAS that were going to attack Niger, and the French were gathering allies to resist militarily in Niger. And then, out of the blue, that ECOWAS thing faded because none of those countries were really willing to attack Niger. Why? I'll tell you why. Now, last week, when Niger gave the Americans and the French notice out of our country, and the Americans and the French started packing up their bases and they're leaving. And at the press conference, there in the background, stood a man with a denim and a t-shirt on, General Surovikin, apparently he is now sort of in charge of the Africa Corp. So what is that? That Africa Corp is a counter for the so-called UN peacekeeping force. But the difference is, where the UN stuff is, they call themselves peacekeepers. The Africa Corps, in my opinion, is BRICS' force, is a BRICS force, and they are a get the fuck out of our country force. That is what I think. So where are we? The BRICS Bank is opposing the World Bank and the IMF. Alternative. BRICS is an alternative for the G7 and the G20. It's there. Africa Corp is an alternative for the UN peacekeepers. So, what is the next move? France hosts the Olympic Games, but they made a rule that the Russian and Belarusian athletes may not compete in their country's national colors. And what happened last week on Monday? Putin opened the BRICS Games in Kazan in Russia. And there's, I think, 19 nations competing. So, alternative for the Olympic Games. Could be. Who can criticize that? Because the Games has been politicized. Interestingly enough, at the BRICS Games, there's no room for these fuckers that identify as something. It's men and women. And if you look at the Global South, the bulk of the countries in the Global South is against that LGBTQ stories and things like that. And, well, so what we are witnessing is not only the destruction of the Western and the American, specifically American hegemony, it is the construction of an alternative. And now we see this mission of Putin to Vietnam and to Northern Korea. And it was, to me, quite obvious when Putin arrived in North Korea and he walked off the plane to meet Kim Jong-un. Putin is a guy that very rarely smiles. He was just smiles between him and Kim, and you could see the atmosphere was friendly and light-hearted, as if they were old friends. Now, just for those that are not informed, North Korea and Russia has a common border south of Vladivostok. It's only 46 kilometers, but it is a common border. So they are actually neighbors. So for North Korea to interact with Russia, with trade or with whatever, they do it directly. They don't need to go across borders of other countries. That's important to keep that in mind. So then we have the situation with North Korea is apparently they've got the best disciplined military force in the world. The best disciplined. And they've got a big force. Where the SMO was just starting and the guys Ransom Kadyrov from Chechnya sent a lot of soldiers to go and help the Russians in the Donbass. And North Korea offered 100,000 men, fully equipped, armed, and provisioned to help fight in the Donbass. And North Korea paying their salaries and wages and everything. So it was cost-free to Putin. The North Koreans just wanted the opportunity to give their soldiers practical experience against NATO, as the Korean general said in that video I saw. But Putin did not accept that offer. But it is there. Just interesting to know, the rebuilding of Mariupol is spectacular. My information is there's 20,000 North Korean artisans and workers working in Mariupol with the Russians, rebuilding Mariupol. So, what do we have? Here we sit with North Korea, a country that has been sanctioned into oblivion basically by the West, and for as long as I can remember. And now Putin is strengthening relationships with North Korea, and they signed a new cooperation agreement, and this time there's a clause in that agreement similar to the NATO Article 5 clause. If North Korea is attacked, Russia will help. If Russia is attacked, North Korea will help. That is the thing that is causing skid marks in the underwear in Washington. North Korea has got a massive heavy industry. Plus apparently they've got a massive explosive manufacturing industry. And the Russians has now been busy with them for quite a while, 2 or 3 years, modernizing their industrial capacity. And there was at a stage, there were serious questions about the quality control on the ammunition that North Korea were producing. They were producing a moor's lot, but there was quality control issues. Apparently the Russians have sorted that out for them. And then last week I read an article, Korea shipped 1 million rounds of artillery ammo to Russia. Now that is a shocker for the West, because they are trying now for I don't know how many months to get enough ammunition for Ukraine, and they can't do it. Their production capacity is pathetic. But they allowed it. They allowed these green maniacs to deindustrialize America, Canada, and Europe. The last major industry that was brought to its knees was the German industry. And between von der Leyen and the Greenies and the Americans, they've managed to basically deindustrialize Germany. So what has Europe got left? But let's come back to North Korea and Putin. So this new agreement that was signed is cementing the relationship between the two countries. And what is going to happen is through that relationship, North Korea is going to be able to break out of the sanctions stranglehold that America has got on it. So I have a suspicion in 2 to 3 years we're going to see a different North Korea. And the same is for Vietnam. Putin was warmly welcomed in Vietnam, and apparently some really good agreements were signed between the two countries. And Putin has said that Russia will veto if the Security Council tries to renew the sanctions against North Korea. Now, look at what is happening there. You've got Russia, and we know the Russian military capacity now. You've got China, a massive military force. You've got North Korea, a serious military force. And you've got Iran. Those 4 countries will wipe the West off the face of the earth militarily in a very short space of time. It's not going to take them 2 or 3 or 5 years to do it. I listened to some commentators that said if a war should break out between the West and that bloc, within a week there will not be a single floating warship of the West anywhere on the ocean. But those crazy people there in the shithouse in Washington keeps on fueling the fires. They cannot meet the demands of a conventional war with Russia. Now add China, North Korea and Iran into the mix, and where are they then? But those mad Americans are pushing for a war with China. So the American people better wake up. Their golden days are over of being the world dominant power. It's over. It's never coming back. And they are financially so deep in the shit, 10 generations can't work off the debt that the Americans have. And yet the American people allow that government of theirs to just make more debt and more debt and more debt, while their own country is falling apart. It's falling apart. Go and look at how many people live on the streets, how many people are unemployed, how many people are living in their cars. Their infrastructure is collapsing. So, this visit of Putin to North Korea should make every Westerner sit up straight. And then we have in South Africa a fuck up with this GNU. I see more and more and more articles coming out that the DA has got a bloody death grip on that GNU. Now, what you as a South African must not forget, the DA is the tip of the spear of XXX, and they are 100% against BRICS. Now, we as the South African people need to understand, if the fucking DA manages or tries to pull South Africa out of BRICS, the whole country will have to stand up and say, fuck that. Because BRICS is the future. You must be dumb, mentally retarded, and totally uneducated if you cannot see that BRICS is the future. The West is done. The West is financially bankrupt. And for us here in South Africa, our future lies with BRICS. And that has got nothing to do with Russia or China or what. It is all to do with facts and realities. So, we must be very, very, very careful that the DA does not ruin the relationship between South Africa and BRICS. Because you must believe me, they are going to try and do it. Because they are XXX agents and puppets and whatever you want to call them. And XXX hates BRICS. So, that is something that we as South Africans must be very careful of. That the DA don't sneak that shit into our lives. The West is done. Economically, it is done. It has had its days. And instead of showing the world that they want to be good neighbors, they are just walking around threatening people all over the world and sanctioning people and countries and all of that. But for us as South Africans, we must be very careful that this DA do not fuck the relationship up between South Africa and BRICS. Think about these things and think about what I've said. Xi Jinping and Putin is setting BRICS up to become an alternative for the UN, for the World Bank, for the IMF, for the Olympic Games, for the UN security forces, and there's an alternative payment system away from SWIFT. That's quite a lot of things that has already happened. And this is just the beginning. Creating an alternative for the UN will take a little bit of time. But we can see what we are seeing now with Putin and Kim Jong-un, that Russia as a major BRICS partner is now giving North Korea an opening to get out of the stranglehold of the Western sanctions. And the same has happened to Iran. So we will have to be very, very aware that the DA do not sabotage our BRICS relationship. I'm going to say it again. I am just disappointed that no Boer delegations visited the SPIEF conference in St. Petersburg. That is the future, the so-called Global South. And just to end with why I say BRICS is the future, you must understand that the BRICS bloc and the Global South represents roughly 80% of the world's population. That is a massive market. That is a massive number of people that must eat. That's a massive number of consumers that can use things that you make. Think about that. Please give me a like and a subscribe and share the thing. And I want to say thank you to the people that are supporting the channel financially. I really appreciate it. I see the debit orders. It is fabulous for me. If you do a support by debit order, you're helping me in two ways. First, obviously, I'm getting some cash that I can use. But secondly, is you're helping my business. A business that has been pushed very hard with BEE cuck, which I resisted. I refused to play that game. And I paid dearly for it. But I'm a man of principle, and I'm not going to negotiate on my principles. I'm saying again, thank you to everybody that supports me. And I see that there is some of the overseas supporters that are supporting me through PayPal. I really appreciate that, guys. It is everything, every piece, every cent helps. So, on that note, once again, thank you for your support. Have a great evening.